I'm Chloe, and in my family, I'm the name people try to forget. They still bring me up at Thanksgiving dinners, but not with pride. I'm mentioned like a cautionary tale, a whisper of warning. Don't end up like Chloe, the girl who had a shot then burned it all down. I once studied at Austin Academy, a prestigious officer training program in Texas. I dreamed of wearing the uniform, of standing tall on the parade grounds, just to see my father, a Gulf War veteran, look at me the way he looked at my sister, Natalie. But that dream collapsed by my third semester. A breakdown hit early in my second year, insomnia, panic. Every night I'd lie awake, my heartbeat pounding like someone knocking from the dark. I was pulled from the program for failing to meet psychological combat readiness standards. Just one cold sentence on a piece of paper, and suddenly, I was a disappointment, as my own mother labeled me the last time I ever sat at the family table. Natalie, 3 years younger, was the golden girl of the Jacksons. She not only passed the elite selection, but graduated top of her class from the Air Force Training School in Arizona. At 24, she was already a captain. The local paper ran a feature on her. They hung her photo next to the American flag in the living room, right where our parents' wedding photo used to be. And me? I was the smudge in the family album. That night, on Natalie's 25th birthday, I returned home after nearly 2 years away. My mother texted me just 3 words: "Come to party." No, how are you? No, we miss you. Just a cold directive. The house was unchanged. Faded gray shingles, the back gate creaking when the wind picked up. But the air felt different. Thick, rehearsed. Like every corner of it had been remade to revolve around one person, Natalie. I walked in, and no one looked up. All eyes were fixed on the center of the room, where my sister stood in a sharply pressed uniform, like she'd stepped out of a recruitment poster. She was laughing with an old high school friend, who upon seeing me smirked. "Oh, Chloe, still unemployed?" My mother walked over, gave me a limp hug so faint I questioned if she even touched me. Then she whispered without meeting my eyes, "Just don't cause a scene tonight, okay?" Those words hit like stone, but I didn't flinch. I was used to it. In this house, I was background noise, never muted, never heard. Dinner felt like a miniature military ceremony. They raised their glasses to Natalie. "She's the pride of the nation. We should all learn from her." No one asked me to speak. No one asked how I was doing. There wasn't even a chair set for me. When I looked around, my dad simply arched a brow. "You can grab the folding chair from the porch." So I did. Each step felt like I was walking out of my own existence. But I didn't crumble. I sat at the far end of the table and watched. Like a ghost that learned how to smile. After that party, I left the house right at 9:45 p.m. Laughter still spilled from the windows as I walked through the backyard, past the reach of the warm porch light. I stood there for a long time, my hand still cold from gripping that metal chair. No one came after me. No questions, no hug, and no one knew that just hours later, I would no longer carry the last name Jackson on paper. I caught a night bus to the airport with a small backpack and a recruitment contract printed in specialty ink with no name written on it. It was the only thing I got after meeting a recruiter at a cafe in New Mexico 2 months earlier. A conversation that lasted exactly 11 minutes. No business card, no promises, just one final question. "Are you ready to disappear?" I said. "I already have." The program I was recruited into didn't exist on any Pentagon records. They called it the Strategic Decryption Office, Theta 9, a hyper-classified branch under the Department of Defense, tasked with cyber threat response and unconventional warfare. My real name was erased from federal databases, my social security number disabled. I became a string of code, KX2107, and with that new identity, I stepped into a world no one in my family, not even Natalie, could imagine. The first training facility was hidden deep within Bridger Teton National Forest, Wyoming. No maps, No address, no cell signal. All electronic activity was blocked. We lived like phantoms. No photos, no journals, no phone calls home. There, I learned to breach satellite networks without standard links, to crack quantum encrypted codes, and to command simulated warfare systems for fifth-generation combat. But more importantly, I learned to stay silent. Once, I asked the commanding lieutenant why none of our achievements were recorded. He gave me just one answer. We don't need medals. We're the reason other people get to wear them. After 13 months of training, I was deployed to the Baltic Peninsula for a mission that was never publicly disclosed. The objective? Dismantle a broadcast station controlling virtual propaganda campaigns capable of manipulating elections in 3 allied nations. We wore no uniforms, no insignia. To the locals, I was just a foreign telecom engineer doing field research. But after 2 a.m., I'd be in a dark room, decoding signals from automated microsatellites, uncovering vulnerabilities hidden among hundreds of disguised transmissions, and crashing an entire system with a single 27-second command sequence. One night, I stared at my reflection in the mirror of a tiny hostel in Riga. The glass was foggy, the light yellow, and the face staring back at me looked like a stranger. I was no longer Chloe Jackson, the second daughter, Natalie's sister, the one labeled a failure. I was the blind spot in the system, the place where orders were rerouted so no one could trace their origin. Once, I was tasked with escorting a scientist who'd been betrayed by his own team. We had to pass through an abandoned mining tunnel in Montenegro, just a few miles from the border. That night was so cold, our breath turned into white frost even inside tactical masks. As we retreated, he asked me, "If you die here, who would know your name?" I replied without hesitation, "No one, and that's how it should be." Over 4 years, I traveled through 11 countries, completed 9 top-secret missions, and was never acknowledged. I once lay inside a refrigerated truck for 16 hours just to track a phantom signal near the Turkish border. I once posed as a translator to access encrypted data during a scientific summit in Kyoto. Each time I returned to the US, it was through nameless airports, carrying false passports, sleeping in rooms with no numbers on the doors. I lived underground, shielded by layers of security that even Natalie, the one constantly praised, was never trained to understand. They didn't know what I had become. And maybe they never needed to. One time, I returned to Spokane for Easter. I parked 3 blocks from my parents' house. I didn't go in. I didn't call. I just sat in my car, watching the house through the windshield, the porch light glowing, the small American flag fluttering gently. And I knew, to them, I was still Chloe, the one who gave everything up. But they didn't know. I gave up the light to protect those who still lived in it. It was a Friday morning, early April, at the Fort Monroe Tactical Training Center in Colorado. Dry wind swept across the vast training grounds, where every step crunched sand beneath thick-soled boots. I was there as an unofficial guest. No uniform, no rank insignia, just a heavy black coat zipped up to my collar, and a guest pass embedded with a digital chip. No name, just a string of code. ID, OS, Phoenix 12. I walked quietly through the south gate. No one noticed, like a ghost familiar with the security system. The only person who knew I was coming was Colonel Marcus Dillard, commanding officer at Fort Monroe, and a man who owed me his life from the Nebula Slope operation in the Baltic Sea. Marcus didn't ask why I was coming. He only sent one message. "Cadet number 17, Company C, your sister is taking her final test. Maybe it's time." From the observer section, I sat behind the tactical fence. The harsh sunlight beat down on the visors of the cadets standing in 3 tight formations. Their cadence echoed, boots stomping in rhythm that rattled the chest of anyone watching. In the middle row, I saw my sister, Natalie Jackson, wearing a desert camo uniform, gripping her training M4A1 tightly, eyes forward, unblinking. She was still the same, decisive, tough, confident to the edge of arrogance. I didn't feel proud. I felt something oddly ironic. My sister, who once said I was only good at quitting, was now training under commanders who had silently signed off on deployment orders that I personally drafted. When the simulation began, the lead instructor stepped forward, Senior Sergeant Elroy Benson, known as the Desert Lion, a hardened Iraq veteran who once chewed out a lieutenant in front of an entire unit, one of those men said to see through rank. Benson walked the line, inspecting each soldier. When his eyes passed over me, sitting silently in the observation zone, he froze. His scarred eyes widened. He changed direction, abandoning the test, and walked straight toward me, as if he'd seen a ghost from an old war. He stopped in front of me, no words. Then he saluted, a crisp, precise, formal military salute. "Brigadier General Chloe Monroe, ma'am." The air turned to ice in less than a second. The entire training unit fell silent. Natalie turned around, first confused, then stunned, almost staggering. Her training weapon slipped from her grip, hitting the ground with a sharp, cold thud. Someone in the ranks whispered, "General? That's her sister? No way." I didn't stand. I simply gave a slight nod and spoke just loud enough for Benson to hear. "A salute will do, Sergeant. I'm here in a personal capacity." He nodded once more and returned to position, offering no explanation. His actions alone were all the confirmation anyone needed. The training continued, but the atmosphere didn't. Curious glances began to ripple across the field. Natalie couldn't stay still. Her eyes occasionally flicked toward me, not with the usual contempt, but with something else. Shock? Doubt? Maybe even admiration? As for me, I quietly rose when the training bell rang, stepped away from the observation area, and headed toward the south gate. Right before stepping outside, I paused. From behind, a voice called out, dry but choked, "Are you really a general?" I didn't turn around. I simply replied, like a breeze drifting by, "I never failed. I just chose not to need recognition." 2 days after the training session, Natalie still hadn't recovered. Since the moment Sergeant Benson saluted me in front of the entire unit, she'd been disoriented. She tried to act normal, kept going through the drills, but her eyes kept darting back to the guest section where I had sat. For the first time in her life, maybe she was wondering, have I ever truly known who my sister is? That night, in the rookie dorm, Natalie dug through the old duffel bag I'd given her more than a year ago, on her 24th birthday. Back then, I had shown up unannounced at her apartment in San Diego, said no greetings, left a navy blue duffel, and only said one thing before walking away. "When you're old enough to understand, open the bottom compartment." Natalie had thought I was being sarcastic. She tossed the bag into the back of a closet and never looked at it again, until tonight. In the dim light, she unzipped the hidden lower pocket. Inside was a small, rectangular device, palm-sized, scratch-resistant casing with a single port and an unmarked touch button. She plugged it into her military-issued tablet. The screen flickered once, then went black. A moment later, a stark white line of text appeared, like a whisper from the void. "Access verification, command code ASHDWX14. Natalie hesitated, but as if entranced, she typed in her temporary cadet login, the kind used for accessing simulated training materials. The screen trembled slightly. A soft beep followed, barely audible, but unmistakable. Then, like a flood bursting through a dam, data began to pour across the screen. "Access to Shadow System confirmed. File, Phoenix Black Archive, initializing. Warning, insufficient clearance level." Meanwhile, I was in a small guest unit deep within the secure zone at Fort Monroe. I wasn't carrying a phone, but there was a sensor embedded behind the mirror, a classified receiver capable of alert-level communications from higher command. A red light blinked, an emergency code sequence appeared. Alert, Level 3, unauthorized shadow ad access. Location: Fort Monroe, 2nd floor, female dormitory. Device tag: KX2107P. I froze. Visible decline in TV acting between P stood for prototype. It was the device I used during my earliest missions, never to be activated unless command infrastructure collapsed. And I had left it for Natalie, hoping she'd never be curious. I threw on my coat and left the room in 30 seconds. When I arrived, Natalie was frozen on the bed, eyes wide, fingers still resting on the tablet, as if hypnotized. The screen now glowed black, a single warning pulsing in red. Unauthorized intrusion. Unknown ID detected. Counter-response protocol activated. I snatched the device and disconnected it before the system could trigger a full wipe. But it was too late. From the technical command center, alarm lights began to flash. I heard footsteps, the hiss of security doors unlocking. And I knew the system had found me, not Chloe Jackson, but the name they once erased from records. Brigadier General Monroe, former commander of the Phoenix Project. Natalie was still staring at me, speechless for the first time in her life. I exhaled slowly, eyes still on the screen, then turned to her. You just woke a nightmare that should have stayed asleep. You're a general? You're the one behind everything I just saw? Natalie's voice cracked. I nodded, and now the system thinks I'm the intruder. 3 minutes later, I received a secure call from Strategic Command. Brigadier General Monroe, the system has detected unauthorized access from a device once under your command. We are required to suspend all of your access privileges and initiate an internal investigation. I replied, I'm requesting authorization to investigate this breach myself. The access was unintentional, but someone has been waiting to exploit this opportunity. I ended the call and turned to Natalie. We need to clean up this mess. Right now. You're no longer just a cadet. You've become a link in the chain. She didn't protest. She just sat there, hands clenched tightly, then whispered to herself, So this is the truth. You never failed. You've just been silent, because no one in this family had the courage to see who you really are. That night, after Fort Monroe's system temporarily disabled alerts and security units returned to standby mode, Natalie and I were taken to a deep underground internal surveillance room reserved for potential reputational damage to the military if made public. In other words, we'd just stepped into administrative hell. I requested full system access using clearance code OS Black Level 6, a privilege that had been frozen since I withdrew from the Phoenix Strategic Unit 3 years ago. The surprise? The code still worked. Which meant someone had kept it alive, waiting for me to come back. Inside the surveillance room was a single main screen, 3 auxiliary control panels, and one person I never expected to see again. Sergeant Richard Wexler, the man who once managed the distributed encryption network during Operation Crimson Pillar in Eastern Europe. His face hadn't changed much, cold, calm, but his eyes were sharper now, like blades that had seen too much. Richard nodded when he saw me. Chloe, they sent me here to contain you, but I know which people are more trustworthy than an administrative order. There was no need for small talk. Help me trace the data stream that was just accessed via SHDWX14. I suspect a sleeper code was embedded, waiting for a trigger like this. 30 minutes later, Natalie, Richard, and I sat in front of the central console. Encrypted data scrolled by like a waterfall, hex characters flickering like lights in the night. Natalie stayed silent, eyes locked on the screen, trying to comprehend it all. She didn't ask. She listened. Finally, Richard paused at a short segment of code embedded in the subroutine of the device Natalie had unknowingly activated. Here, it's an old command string used in fallback systems from around 2020, no longer in use, but very familiar. I stepped closer. Don't tell me that's a C7 Ray Vena response signature. Richard nodded. Exactly. And the only person who ever used that protocol to build countermeasure routines was Lucas Arden, I said. Richard frowned. No. Arden died during the mission in Baku. But the guy who trained with him, and the one you blocked from promotion in the Glassfall case, is still alive. My hands tightened. Elliot Cade. 5 years ago, Cade was a mid-level officer in the Strategic Data Command. When I uncovered that he had been tampering with simulation exercises, altering results to serve a political interest group, I filed a report directly to the Pentagon. The matter was quietly cleaned up. Cade wasn't prosecuted but was reassigned to a civilian-adjacent project. I thought it was over. But now, he's back. Like a worm hidden inside the very system I helped build. We tracked the code spreading from Natalie's device. It didn't just activate archived files. It generated a masked query string, sending data to an external IP registered under a civilian tech consulting project called Neural Front Analytics, headquartered just about 12 miles from Fort Monroe. I leaned back in my chair. He's right here, watching us, living among us as a nameless contractor, and he used Natalie's mistake as a crack to infiltrate the entire system. Natalie remained silent, then whispered, So, I didn't just access something by accident? I made it easier for him? I turned to her. Yes, but he planned this long ago. You were just the final key. At that moment, the secondary alarm rang. A red message flashed across the screen. Unauthorized access in progress. Origin. Strategic Simulation Auxiliary Network. Authentication code. Chloe Monroe. Tier 1. General Clearance. Richard looked at me. Natalie froze. I whispered, Amy doesn't just want in. He wants to brand me a traitor. The enemy wasn't launching a direct attack. He was using my name, my past, everything I once sacrificed to keep buried in the dark to turn me into a national threat. And this time, I couldn't fight alone. I turned to Natalie. You ready? She swallowed hard, then nodded. If you were willing to carry the consequences for me, then now, I'm going with you to the end. Elliot Cade's plan was nearing its final stage. He had used a hidden command to hijack my network identity, spoofing access logs through legacy military systems, embedding malicious code into the combat simulation network. If successful, the entire Phoenix strategic system, the one I helped build, would collapse. And every leak would have my name on it. He didn't just want to destroy my reputation. He wanted to erase me from history by making me the face of betrayal. But he forgot one thing. I never left the battlefield. I only stepped back to learn how to strike from where no one would see it coming. Natalie and I got in the vehicle at 2:17 a.m. Destination, the Neural Front Analytics Facility, Cade's hideout, masked as a civilian military tech consultancy. A 3-story building that looked like a software office on the surface, but beneath it was a data bunker directly linked to auxiliary satellite communication networks. Natalie wore soft armor tucked under a charcoal gray hoodie. She didn't say much, but I could see the shift in her eyes. Once filled with doubt, then fear, now resolve. Are you sure we can bait him? I looked at her, still slotting the encryption drive into the backup device. I don't need him to believe me. I just need him to think I'm scared. We infiltrated the sub-basement through an emergency exit that had its passcode permanently disabled in 2019, something only someone who helped design the system architecture would know. Past 3 security layers, we reached the auxiliary server, where the data routing system had already been compromised from within. I connected the Phoenix Mirror backup drive to the server's auxiliary port. It contained a precise mirror of the 7-year-old simulation system, programmed with a false response model that could perfectly mimic hacker input without revealing it was all simulated data. I was building a mirror, a data maze, a trap. Cade, sitting a few miles away, would believe he was inside the real system. He'd reveal his protocol, and I'd get the final trace, his route command, and his active location. As expected, after 17 minutes, my data string began receiving an anomaly. Overwrite commands from a civilian device encoded in Tier 3 military encryption. That was him. I embedded a response packet, reversed the data stream, and attached a small code segment I called DAO7. When Cade received the next packet, his system would automatically decrypt a video file, encrypted for 4 years, containing all the illegal orders he issued during Operation Glassfall, including the audio recording he once tried to erase. I didn't need to catch him. I needed him to expose himself. 1 hour later, a joint military special operations unit and internal surveillance team raided Neural Front's headquarters. Elliot Cade was arrested on sight. He tried to wipe the drives, but the video I embedded auto-played when Pentagon auditors scanned the server. In the video, his voice echoed, "If Monroe's alive, I'll use her shadow to burn this system to the ground." He didn't know. The dark is where I'm strongest. The tribunal took place 1 week later, at the Strategic Council chamber in D.C. I didn't wear a uniform. I entered the room in a gray suit, no medals, no rank, just a 3-inch thick file and a leather-wrapped USB stick. When it was my turn, the prosecution asked, "Brigadier General Chloe Monroe, can you explain why your encrypted identity appeared in a dangerous access sequence targeting a high-level strategic simulation system?" I offered no justification. I simply plugged the USB into the projector and played Cade's recording. When the audio ended, the entire room fell silent. General Morrow, head of the council, straightened in his seat and said, "No further defense is necessary. This evidence speaks for itself." Natalie stepped forward as the final witness. In her hands was the system access log, detailing every login from the old device. She spoke, her voice shaky but firm. "I was the one who accessed it by accident, but without my sister, the consequences would have been unimaginable. She's not the saboteur. She's the one who saved the entire system from collapse." The outcome: all charges against me were dropped. My honor was restored. But more than that, I reclaimed something I thought I had lost forever: the trust of the very sister who once looked down on me the most. As I walked out of the hearing room, Natalie was waiting. She said nothing. She simply handed me a small item, a silver badge shaped like a phoenix. The old symbol of Phoenix, one only founding members were allowed to keep. "You don't have to fly high to see clearly," she whispered. "You just have to be the one brave enough to fly into the fire." 3 days after the hearing, I was summoned to the Pentagon. The meeting took place in a glass room on Command Level 9, a space where decisions were never signed but always shifted the country's board game. Across from me sat General Arthur Leland, chairman of the Strategic Review Committee. He had been following my files since I was an agent under the codename Orion Delta, tied to a complex rescue op in Libya, where the price of victory was that no one could ever know the name of those who fell. He slid a pale brown file folder across the table toward me. On its cover was a bright red stamp: "Declassification Proposal, Phoenix Legacy." I didn't open it. I looked him straight in the eye. "We want to tell your story," he said. "No more secrecy, no more encryption. You deserve to stand in the light." I stayed silent for a long time. Each breath was thick with memory. Every mission I'd survived, every teammate I'd left behind in the desert, in the snow, underground, or lost at sea. No one knew their names. No one wrote books about them. But they were still alive, maybe under a different name at some anonymous base, or simply in the vows we were never allowed to repeat. I picked up the file. "If I sign this," I asked, Will anyone else be exposed? General Leland nodded slowly. We'll do our best to keep it secure, but once the files are declassified, curious eyes will come. Those who worked with you could be pulled into the light. I exhaled deeply. I thought of Stanton, who saved my life in northern Syria by drawing fire away from me, and now lives quietly in Ohio as David Clark. I thought of Dasha, the Russian cryptography expert who defected, now running a computer repair shop in Portland. And James Cordero, the former recon soldier who once buried his own team in sand to protect critical data, now a rural elementary school teacher in Texas. If my name appeared, they would never know peace again. I pushed the file back. If someone needs to hear this story, I said, let them hear only part of it. The part without my name. The part about the ones who survived, not because they were celebrated, but because they stayed silent when it mattered most. General Leland didn't reply immediately, but I saw it in his eyes. Not disappointment, but profound respect. We'll archive the entire file, he said, in the deepest vault. And if one day you change your mind, just say the word. I stood, nodded. I'll speak when truth can no longer hurt anyone. A week later, I was invited to the Walker Strategic Security Academy to attend the honorary graduation ceremony for a new class of Special Operations officers. I didn't take the stage. I sat in the last row, cap pulled low, listening to every speech. Knowing no one in that room realized I was part of the very curriculum they'd been trained on. When the project presentations began, a name appeared on the screen. Natalie Jackson. Proposal to upgrade strategic response models from Phoenix simulations. My sister stood there, a thick folder in hand, speaking with clarity and purpose. What she held wasn't a thesis. It was redemption. A way to say, she understood. She had learned what I once gave up my entire career to protect. After her presentation, Natalie came down to the back row, silent. She sat beside me. Then she pulled something from her pocket, a silver badge shaped like a flame. An emblem, never officially issued, only passed hand to hand through the shadow network. I found it at the old Phoenix base, she said. They called it the Silent Flame, meant for those who'd burn themselves just to keep the team warm. She pinned the badge to my coat, just above my heart. No applause, no flash of cameras, just two people in the middle of a crowd, sharing a moment no one else could understand. That evening, when I returned to my small apartment overlooking the Potomac River, there was a letter on the table, no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. I've seen the light, but I know you still chose the dark. Thank you for not needing to be remembered, so others could live true to their names. Natalie. That fall, leaves blanketed the walkways around Fort Walker, where Natalie had just been appointed a Level 2 Strategic Analysis Officer, a position that demanded more than orders. She had to think like an enemy, act like a teammate, and most importantly, stay grounded when no one applauded. I wasn't at the appointment ceremony. I was one state away, in a cabin tucked deep in a pine forest, where there was no cell signal and no one knew who I used to be. But I knew. Natalie had stepped out of my shadow, not to shine, but to carry forward the path I had once chosen to leave behind. Her transformation didn't happen overnight. It began the very night she stood before the disciplinary council and took full responsibility for the classified system breach on my behalf. I wanted to stop her, but the look in Natalie's eyes told me she was no longer the girl who once envied me. She was a soldier, and a sister who had come to understand the value of silence, something she used to mistake for weakness. After the hearing, Natalie declined all interview requests. Though the media only knew a sliver of the story, she was still pulled into the spotlight. She followed the one rule I had lived by for a decade. The fewer people know what you do, the easier it is to protect what's right. Lieutenant General Leland had offered her the Medal of Integrity and Responsibility, a distinction rarely awarded to someone so young. But she refused, saying, I didn't do anything heroic. I just corrected something that should have been right all along. A month later, I sent her a package. No sender listed. Inside was a small wooden box and a handwritten note. This was mine, but it lives better in your hands. Inside the box was the Silver Phoenix badge, never officially issued but forged for every core member of Phoenix, the covert unit I once led. She had returned it to me at the academy. Now, I gave it back, for good. When Natalie pinned that badge to her uniform during her first team briefing at Fort Walker, most didn't recognize what it was. A young soldier asked, "Where'd you buy that? Looks different." Natalie just smiled. "It's not for sale. It's not for show. It reminds me that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means you're standing on the front line, others can't see." A few months later, Natalie was assigned to the high-level security vulnerability team, Zero Glinta program, once deployed by my unit in 2017. She didn't know some of her new teammates were my former operatives, now under completely new identities. During one strategic attack simulation, Natalie suddenly called to halt the entire system because she'd found a single character anomaly in the response script. Most dismissed it as a trivial glitch, but Natalie didn't back down. She insisted on a full system check. And she was right. That small line was a spoofed code masking a live simulation designed to fool defensive responses. She saved the entire system with nothing more than her instincts and the lesson from someone no one in that room had ever heard of. After the test, Lieutenant Colonel Rollins, head of the project, asked Natalie in private, "Where'd you learn that reaction? It's not in any manual." Natalie answered, "I once saw someone survive on instinct and loyalty to her ideals, not her rank. She taught me to never trust a perfect system. Anything worth trusting is worth someone standing in silence to protect it." I wasn't in that room, and I didn't need to be. That night, Natalie sent me a photo through a secure device. In it was the Silver Phoenix badge, slightly scuffed but neatly fastened to her uniform pocket. Beneath it, she wrote, "I won't replace you, but I'll carry what you believed, and still believe." I received my next assignment on a quiet winter afternoon, with the sky over North Dakota veiled in thin snow and the wind howling like secrets never told. No one saw me off, no one asked where I was going, and no one believed I still served because, on military records, Chloe Monroe had been marked honorably retired nearly 2 years ago. But in a system where truth is buried beneath 10 layers of encryption, there are people who never really retire. They just change missions, change names, rewrite their own histories. Before I left Fort Walker, Natalie met me at 5 a.m. before the training center opened. When no one else was around but the night watch and the wind howling through the steel buildings, she wasn't in uniform, just an old army jacket and the brown wool scarf I gave her 7 years ago. The day I left home without a word. "I know this time you'll be gone longer," Natalie said, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "I'm not asking where. I just wanted to return this." I opened my hand. She placed the Silver Phoenix badge in it, now polished and gleaming like it had never been scratched, but I recognized it instantly. It was the same one. The back clasp still slightly tilted to the left, just the way I used to wear it to avoid the glare of spotlights. I looked at her, ready to ask, "Why give it back?" But she answered before I could speak. "It used to be your reminder to me. Now I don't need it anymore. I remember." On the way to the airport, I didn't think much. I carried nothing but a small bag, some encryption documents, and an old photograph. Faded, showing 6 figures in black standing in the snow, none of their faces visible. On the back was a handwritten line. "We don't carry names. We carry oaths." I don't know who wrote it. Maybe Cordero? Maybe Stanton? Maybe me. Sometimes memories from operations don't belong to anyone. They just linger like a burn that never fades. The flight operated under a civilian tag, but Seat 14B had a special biometric recognition device, meant only for the unlisted. I sat down, fastened my belt, and felt the engines hum. In that moment before takeoff, I thought of my parents, the last time I saw them. Natalie's birthday party last year. No one looked at me for more than 5 seconds. No one mentioned the military. They didn't know, or chose not to know, that the daughter they once called not strong enough had once saved an entire special ops team from an ambush in Syria with just 3 radio commands. And I didn't need them to know. The plane took off around 7:06, on time, no delays, like everything I once wished for in life but rarely received. As the wings cut through the cloud line, I pulled the Phoenix badge from my coat pocket and turned it between my thumb and forefinger. The morning light caught the metal, making it glow like embers. Quiet, but burning. I didn't wear it. I just closed my hand around it and shut my eyes. Because I knew true strength doesn't lie in which stage you stand on. It lies in whether you're willing to keep an oath even when no one remembers it anymore. 1 week later, at Fort Walker, Natalie received a letter with no return address. Inside was the old photo I'd carried, the one of 6 people standing in the snow. Alongside it was a single line: "If you forget, look again." She pressed the photo into the front page of her mission logbook, not for display, not for others to see, just for herself, to remember that loyalty doesn't need applause. Years later, when Natalie had become the lead commander of the strategic training unit, a young recruit once asked her, "Was your sister a legend? Someone said she was." Natalie just smiled and softly replied, "She wasn't a legend. Legends are told over and over. My sister chose to be forgotten." That's how she stayed true to what she believed. I never failed. I just chose to walk where no one stood, so others could keep walking in the light. Chloe Monroe. Chloe's story is a powerful reminder that true strength doesn't come from medals or fame. It comes from integrity and the quiet willingness to sacrifice for what's right. In real life, in a world that often glorifies recognition and spotlight, the ones who make the biggest impact are sometimes the ones no one knows by name. They choose silence, not out of weakness, but because they understand keeping a promise in the dark is worth more than 1,000 cheers in the light. What do you think about Chloe's choices and Natalie's growth? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories about life, family, and the hidden corners of the human heart.